Meeting resumes. We come to FCR 2018 to 1973. This requests members to approve a recommendation by the Establishment Committee at a meeting on December 19, 2018 on the document EC 2018 to 1917. This is for creation of 2 permanent posts of Principal Government Counsel DL3, one each in the Civil Division and the Law Drafting Division of the Department of Justice to better cope with the substantial increase in workload arising from the existing and new initiatives of the 2 divisions. The EC spent about 2 hours on this item and many documents have been submitted. We have with us Mr. Alan Siu, Director of Administration and Development of DOJ, and his team. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Now, on the manpower issue of the DOJ, I have always been following up, and I understand that in particular at the Law Drafting Division, they need a lot of manpower. Many departments say that they want to have new legislation, but because of manpower problems, the Law Drafting Division takes a relatively long time. I make private bills myself. I know the LDD has done its best to certify our draft bills, and for this additional post, I'd like to ask. Now, what is the principal concern on the manpower allocation? Now, the additional post, how will it help? Is it enough? Mr. Siu, the LDD, please. Ms. Chang, Christina Chang.
今次提議開呢一個位咧，最主要係加強我哋喺管理層上邊俾到嘅支援。咁呢個係大致上有2方面。點解呢個位要設喺一個呢一個咁樣嘅職系上邊呢？一方面呢，最主要因為我哋文件上亦都係解釋咗咧，近年來嘅工作量係訴訟方面嘅案件呢係大增嘅。咁係文件嗰度亦都顯示到附件1呢，我哋嘅案件訴訟方面呢喺過往。
And in the past 20 years, there is about a 3-fold increase. Now, apart from the volume, there are many cases that have become very complex over time, and we need an experienced person in litigation and with expertise in civil law, so that he can participate personally in important cases and also to supervise in management. So he has to be a supervisor on the civil litigation unit's work, and he has also to be a supervisor because the CLU has increased significantly in number and in training, including on the job training, on management of information. We need a directorate grade of this level so that the work can become smoother and more efficient. I'd like to ask this Principal Government Counsel post, what is the qualifications or seniority? PQE. It should be 20 years or more usually. Now, considering the factors that I mentioned, this person should have quite ample experience in civil law and in litigation, with expertise in litigation on procedures and in law. Now, on civil litigation, what types of cases would he or she be dealing with mainly? Ms. Chang? We can look at enclosure 2. Now, this shows the division of work in civil division, and in the civil litigation unit, we have 5 teams. Now, we mentioned that there are 5 teams in that table, There are those who deal with judicial reviews and personal injuries cases and disciplinary action, including medical counsel. Also, there is another team that deals with commercial litigation. This might have to do with taxes or with commercial contracts or with disputes with the government that has to be dealt with. There's a separate team that deals with immigration matters. These involve appeals on torture claims or JRs. And we also have a team that deals with the government debts owed to the government. So this might be taxes or student assistance loans. And the same with cost of litigation, also covered here. So this is a rough idea. Gary Fan, 5 minutes. Now, I have some queries on the CLU post. The government says that there is a sharp increase in cases, especially in JR cases. Now, in page 4 of the document, it says that there are increase from 557 2010 into 907 in 2017. So the table on page 3, does it show all the cases? Are they dealt with by the unit concerned in this document?
Paragraph 8, the figures there, they are accurate. They are number of JL cases, and every year they are the number that we still have to handle every year. The JL cases could have just been granted by the court of first instance, or they could be arising out of appeal cases at different levels of court. So they are the figures. As for the question, which unit is responsible for the cases, most of them actually are handled by colleagues from Team 2, that is the public law unit. If the cases are related to immigration or the non-refoulement application, for non-refoulement applications, they are dealt with by Team 4. That is, different teams are responsible for different cases. If that's the case, then we can't easily grasp what's the increase in your overall workload, because often we hear from media reports JL cases involving developers launching JL cases on the decisions by Town Planning Board. So for the cases related to Town Planning Board, what percentage do they make up of the total cases that you're handling? Because the cases in which the Town Planning Board lose, and for those cases to launch and a JL, is that a reason for the increase in your workload? Ms. Zhang, you just mentioned the type of JL cases or cases related to town planning and land use. We have a designated team that is outside of the civil litigation unit. They are the planning, environment, lands, and housing unit. As you can find in enclosure 2, one of the functions of the unit is to deal with cases about planning, environment, lands, and housing, whether it's providing legal advice or handling litigation. the figures concerned, well, I don't have the concrete figure, but my understanding is they make up 40% of the entire JL cases handled. So now you have a division of labor, Team 4, right? Under the civil division. So what kinds of JL cases resulted in the overall increase in your workload? Team 1, that is the civil litigation unit, deals with personal injuries cases, as well as the medical council's commissioning us doing the professional disciplinary proceedings, because they require experts like doctors to deal with claims or disciplinary hearings. So that's the work of Team 1. The other team, Team 4, right? Team 2. I was asking about the Team 2. Team 2 and Team 1, where the new post will be created. Team 2's mainly handling public law cases. That is, most JL cases are dealt with by Team 2. Now we need to have more manpower, not because of a surge in a particular type of work, but because of the overall increase in the litigation unit, increase of workload. Holiday Mo, next one, 5 minutes. Thank you. I'd like to ask about for civil litigation unit, the PGC post. It said that the PGC will be the new person in charge of the unit. That is, not just supervises but oversees the entire unit. Is that what he is supposed to be? Ms. Zhang, yes. We are hoping to create the PGC at the civil litigation unit. He will be the head of the unit. And his responsibilities will be to supervise. Now we have one PGC in the post. We hope that with the FC's approval, we can create an additional post at the same level so that they can share the work. So you already have a supervisor. Now you want to create an additional supervisor to oversee the regional supervisor? We want to create an additional post of PGC. We already have one. We hope that if a proposal is approved to create an additional post, then the two PGCs, they will be at the same level. So it's not that the latest recruit, say if I were the existing PGC, that then the recruit will supervise me. No, yeah, that's not our plan. They will be at the same level, and the new PGC will share the workload. You're saying there's a heavy workload. Can you quantify it? Say workload doubled over a period of time, or 10 times, or more than that, because the various units you mentioned, like injuries, commercial contracts, immigration matters, and so forth. All those are broad areas. You can imagine the heavy, workload for the supervisor. So when you hire a new PGC, the old PGC will, I'm sure his workload be reduced by 50% when the new post is created. But in terms of quantity, I believe that in the paper, I think we've provided the figures. You can look at enclosure 1. Over a 20-year period from 1998, when we had to handle 9,000 plus civil litigation cases. By 2017, the number stood at 36,000 plus. By the end of 2018, the number was over 38,000. So in terms of times, that means we have seen a 3-time increase. But for the PGC's establishment under the Civil Litigation Unit over the past 3 decades, in this unit, it has always had 1 PGC only. And that's not changed at all. Yes, I understand from 9,000 to 36,000 plus, I can imagine the immense workload. And earlier you said that there are cases which became more complicated as it dragged on, and you need someone to be following up throughout. And from the figures you provided and to the complexity of ongoing cases, can you maybe elaborate more on the workload? Say like in the past, like 2 out of 10 cases were getting more and more complex, and now maybe is it out of 10 cases, more than half could become increasingly complicated? Is that what's happening, Ms. Zhang? Under the Civil Litigation Unit for civil lawsuits, they really encompass all sorts of cases. Some are less complicated, as I said, like for debts. There are many cases of debt, but they are relatively less complicated compared to AJR cases or appeal cases. And some cases involve controversial legal points, and they will become complicated too. On the whole, I would say that in terms of numbers, most of the cases are increasingly complicated. Say, looking at the units for JL cases or immigration matters, we have actually allocated at least 40% for handling those cases. For the other teams, we actually allocate less than half of our manpower to them, reflecting the complexity of our work. And we need to, with increased complexity, arrange suitable manpower to handle them. I'll lock in next 5 minutes. I think in handling law drafting and civil litigation, we need to consider the creation of permanent posts. How necessary is it? I hope that the administration can explain to us. Firstly, I'm sure I need to ask some political questions. December 19 last year, in the establishment subcommittee meeting, your colleague, in an answer to how the DOJ outsourced civil cases, they quoted some clear criteria. But lately, in the electrical sitting, the Secretary for Justice, in answering how they would outsource criminal cases, she didn't give a clear answer at all. My question then is, outsourcing civil cases and outsourcing criminal cases, are their criteria different? If we had clear criteria given for outsourcing of civil cases, and yes, the Secretary for Justice didn't give a clear answer on outsourcing criminal cases. Why? And in terms of the figures, I'd like to thank your colleagues for answering my and Zhu Hoidik's question on the cases involving outsourced lawyers. But if you look at the numbers again, there seems to be a pattern that in 2012, outsourcing occupied 72%, 2017 is 65.4%, and 55.7%. By 2018, it's low all of a sudden. 32 cases, that is 25.2%, particularly low percentage. I know you haven't looked at the figures in December, but I don't think there will be a sudden jump in the number in December. In other words, the figures are on the decline. If that's the case, then you explain that the DOJ staff need to do preparation work, preparing legal documents for outsourced cases. But if the numbers are coming down, and now you are asking for the creation of 2 posts, what's the rationale? Ms. Zhang? For the first question, for permanent posts, we are very prudent in creating posts, and we will only propose the creation of the post if there is a long-term need. In terms of outsourced work criteria, you mentioned, I think you were talking about, as shown in our information submitted to LegCo, we talk about our policy on outsourcing work and the considerations made in outsourcing work. The criteria, they are actually applicable to both civil and criminal cases. For civil litigation unit or civil division, how do we apply the criteria as opposed to criminal cases? Well, there could be differences, but in most cases, in outsourcing, we do that because the case itself, because of the complexity of the case, and also maybe it involves legal viewpoints, that we feel that we require opinions from outside legal experts. Besides legal experts, for many outsourced cases, there are also inputs from other experts that we need. So that's also a criterion for outsourcing work within the division. Say if we don't have the expert within our unit, then we need to seek external advice, including cases to do with medical services or taxation. So we need the input of all kinds of specialists or experts. So that's the characteristic of civil division, which is different from other units or divisions. In outsourced work, even though we may actually get the advice from a practicing lawyer outside, within the unit, within the litigation unit, the colleagues play an important role, because before the court trial begins, there's a lot of preparatory work. Like in the case of solicitors, who need to we need to have the input from people like playing the role of solicitors, like statements, oaths, and so forth, and that already form part of the workload of lawyers in our unit. But the numbers are coming down, so why do you still need to create a new post? The figures of outsourced cases are coming down. You are referring to our supplementary information, which lists out the JR cases, and also on the number of cases outsourced every year. So this is just about one type of JR cases. Our list has not included all kinds of cases. For JR cases, for how many of them that are, for number of them that are outsourced, as I just said, it really depends on the need of each case. Even if a JR case, even if it's a JR case, doesn't mean that we will need to seek external legal advice immediately. It depends on the nature of the case, the legal disputes, and the progress of the case involved. So that explains why you see the fluctuation in the figures. Do you want to take 5 minutes? Thank you. I'd like to ask about the figure you mentioned just then. In 2018, number of ongoing GL cases rose to, not GL cases, but ongoing cases in 2018 rose to more than 38,000. Do you have the figures for 2018? That is 5,954. That's the number of newly added cases. Lately, the Chief Justice, at the beginning of the legal year, mentioned that non-refoulement applications increase sharply. That's rare for a Chief Justice to mention the increase in a particular type of cases. And he said that he would study with the Secretary for Justice to amend the law. I don't know exactly what the Chief Justice said, but the Secretary Bureau now is talking about amending the immigration ordinance. In other words, the result is that the non-refoulement applications, should they lose in the JR case, if they may be repatriated before the JR is settled. And the Secretary Bureau said that that could reduce the burden on the courts. My question is, I don't know whether which piece of legislation the Chief Justice was referring to, but for the Security Bureau's point, I'd like to know, does the Department of Justice have the same thinking? That is by amending the immigration ordinance to reduce the number of JL cases, related JL cases. Is that what you're thinking? And secondly, the Chief Justice didn't mention other types of cases that led to the huge backlog of court cases, which stood at 38,000. So following up on what Gary Fan asked, do you have other... Have you seen actually a backlog and increased number of other types of cases?
And for this type of cases, now if you are thinking of amending our legislation to tackle non-refoulement claims, what about other types of cases? In addition to adding staff members, do you have other ways to cope with the increase in such cases? Madam Chair, no, it is not about thinking of strategies to tackle the problem, but because of the workload, we really have a need to do it. And for non-refoulement claims, the administration is planning to amend the immigration ordinance to expedite the different processes, and including the processing time required. And if the application is not accepted, then how the appeals committee or appeals board can deal with appeals quickly. And if the tribunal, if an appeal to the tribunal is unsuccessful again, then, as mentioned by the Chief Justice of the Court of Final Appeal, then the court will be affected, because a judicial review will be... Now, can you be more direct? Does DOJ think that by amending the immigration ordinance, now, according to the Security Bureau, it will not just shorten the processing time of the previous two steps. After the appeal fails with the board or tribunal, then there can be a direct deportation to lower the number of JRs. Is that what you are thinking? Our role is to provide legal advice to the Security Bureau. If they need our legal advice, then we can provide the necessary support. And in giving legal advice, we will have to consider all relevant legislation to ensure that the change in policy or measures have a legal basis. And then there is relevant ruling by the court in relation to detention and other procedures, and where necessary, we will provide legal advice to the relevant departments. Mr. Chen Chen-ying. At the ESC meeting on these two posts, I asked some questions about the law drafting division. My question relates to the law drafting division. I have no strong views about the creation of the two posts because I understand that their workload is heavy. Now, you are going to create a deputy law draftsman 3 post, and according to enclosure 7, he'll be responsible for the drafting of important legislation. It is said here that he will personally draft matters of great significance. He will draft the most complex or sensitive legislation personally. So do you have a definition of such legislation? And I have taken part in Bills Committee to vet finance-related bills. And here you mention single window and other things. I'd like to know whether the new PGC will be responsible for such items. The new PGC will attend meetings of the LegCo, the EXCO, and legislations committees. Today, we have Deputy Law Draftsman 2 present today. In future, DLD3 will attend our meetings. Does that mean that DLD3 will have more qualifications and experience than the current 2? Now, I have a question for Ms. Teresa Johnson as well. Now, your assistant is now Deputy Law Draftsman 2. He's responsible for administrative work. That means he's your deputy. When you are on leave or out of office, he will be acting for you. But it appears that DLD3 will have a very heavy role. Can you explain, please? Yes, Ms. Thompson? Ms. Johnson?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. In terms of what complex and sensitive legislation projects are, the two that are mentioned in the paper, the one dealing with the single trade window and also corporate rescue, both of those fall into that category. But I have to say that it can sometimes be something that is a very short item of legislation that is also considered to be complex or sensitive. But around the world, legislation is becoming more complex, the subject matter and the policies to address that subject matter. And as mentioned in the paper, it will be the case that the third Deputy Law Draftsman will be involved personally in drafting such legislation. In terms of acting as Law Draftsman, the case at present is that both the Deputy Law Draftsman in charge of Subdivision 1 and the Deputy Law Draftsman in charge of Subdivision 2, who is with me here today, both of those rotate through that role depending on effectively who has the greater capacity or who is in the office. So there is a sharing, and there will continue to be a sharing of the acting between the three deputies. I'm sorry, was there another point that I need to...
Qualification and experience of this new position?
Yes, well, certainly in terms of the qualifications for the new role, it will be similar to that mentioned by the civil law officer in terms of about 20 years of drafting experience, preferably in Hong Kong. So again, obviously the person will need to be a lawyer and will need to have that high-level skills around drafting and also around the sort of management for the sort of operational and strategic aspects of the role.
OK，區諾軒議員係
Mr. Al-Nokin, 4 minutes. Last Friday, there was a notice from the administration. The S4J has signed a mutual agreement about mutual enforcement of commercial and civil rulings in Hong Kong and in the mainland. It's mutual enforcement of such ruling. Well, although it may not be directly related to the current paper, but now you are now going to create a new post of PGC in Civil Litigation Division. I'd like to know whether that person will follow up on the agreement I just mentioned. And under the Civil Litigation Unit, there is a commercial division. I'd like to know whether the new post will have anything to do in this. Because of the mutual enforcement of ruling by the two sides, will the CLU have a heavier workload? No, the thing referred to by Mr. Au is not for the Civil Litigation Unit, but for the Legal Policy Unit. Whether there will be an impact on the workload of the CLU, I do not see any immediate impact. So the Legal Policy Unit will be responsible. Well, commercial and civil matters, but you have a commercial litigation branch under the Civil Litigation Unit, but that is the work of the Legal Policy Unit, not the CLU. So your unit will not be involved at all. I don't see how our workload will be directly impacted on. All right. I don't quite understand, because it's about commercial and civil rulings. So I don't know why your unit is not involved. All right. Just last Monday, the CS4A has also submitted a paper on mutual recognition of a ruling by Hong Kong and Macau. And I think this is mentioned in para 18 of the paper. I'd like to know whether law amendments here is related to the new posts. For service of instruments, I'd like to know whether these two units are involved. Policy is one thing, and service of instruments is also another issue. Which one? Chairman. Mr. Lee, can you? For service of documents or instruments, I think the international law unit will be involved. Within the CLU, if there is service of documents in between two jurisdictions and adaptation of our rules has to be done, then CLU will provide legal advice on what alterations or adaptation to the relevant rules have to be done. Dr. Fernando Zhang, para 6 says that in between 1998 and 2017, there was almost a threefold increase in the number of civil litigation cases from 9,000 something to 36,000. So for civil litigation cases, I'd like to know what are they, and what are the categories where you have seen a greatest and extent of increase, and what about the outstanding cases? Can we have a breakdown, please? Yes. On the whole, the range is really very wide, but I think there are three in the main where COU has to pay particular attention to. They will involve JR cases. There can be different types of JR cases. And I think non-refoulement claims or torture claims are have attracted the greatest attention, and also Team 4 is responsible for this, and also personal injury, and also hearings of the medical council. We expect to see a rise in this category because the amendment ordinance was passed last year to expedite the processing of complaints. And D of J is protection of public interest and charitable matters. So it has to interfere or intervene cases where public interest is involved. Although we are not parties to the litigation, we have the duty to be involved. It might be required by the court or by one of the parties. Another type of cases where we have seen a substantial rise is collecting debts or costs after a case on behalf of the government. So these are the very rough categories of cases we have. Thank you. But in enclosure 1, the number rose from 9,000 odd in 1998 to over 36,000 in 2017. It was a steady increase. It's not that there was a sudden increase of a few tens of $1,000s in a year. Rather, the figures rose gradually from 9,000 to 10,000, 15,000, and 13,000. So the rise did not just happen overnight. It's been over 2 decades. So you have acquired 20 years of experience. And you should know that the number of cases, or the rise in the number of cases, hasn't come from one particular type. How come you have waited so long before you have asked for a new post? And what is the crux of the matter? What is the reason for the increase in the past 2 decades? Is there any backlog, or has there been a substantial rise in new cases? Now, we have provided supplementary information to the council, and we have given figures on net increase per year. There are about 5,000 new cases every year. In 2018, it was close to 6,000. We had 5,154 cases. This is because of an increase in different types of cases. Well, I just explained to you the different areas of work that would affect us. So this is an overall trend. And in the past 20, 30 years, we have witnessed an continuous increase in workload. But for 3 decades, we have only got one principal government council, PGC. We have boosted our manpower in other regard, but not at such a senior level. We have added a new government council and also a deputy principal government council. We are only proposing this creation of posts because the trend is confirmed and long-standing. Mr. James To, when it comes to workload and manpower, now I have been reading the paper all the way to paragraph 27, and here it says in 2018, LDD has to handle numerous items for at least two major issues, namely the budget and tax-related measures and the local legislation for the national anthem law. Now for budgets, it's an annual exercise, and that was in 2018. Are you talking about the 2019 budget? So are you referring to the 2018 budget? And as for the national anthem law, it's already drafted. Was it because that the paper was first submitted to the ESC and the national anthem law or the bill was not yet drafted? But the bill has just received its first and second reading, and is not as thick and complicated as the Futures and Securities Ordinance. How come you have used these examples to tell us that this new post is very important? So why are these two major issues? Why have you put these two as your major issues? Well, even though they're major, they may not necessarily relate to your increase in workload.
The LDD, please.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for this question. Certainly the legislation that was of which we were aware and able to speak about in the paper at the time it was being prepared included the National Anthem Bill. As you rightly point out, that bill has now been introduced. But the trend for increased workload and for increased complexity in terms of the number of bills of 100 pages and of 200 pages, which is one indication of sort of complex legislation. Those have increased markedly over the period, and the trend is just continuing. And this trend is not confined to Hong Kong, but is something that you see internationally in terms of the volume of legislation and the complexity of legislation. So these are certainly examples, but they are not. This is not where the legislative program for Hong Kong ends. It will continue.
主席，我好難去理解呢個答案呢。你點？我問你嘅意思就係話，例如
Now, my question is, for example, National Anthem Law, how many pages? Why do you cite this example? You think this is very complex? Now, if you ask me, there would be other legislation that's more complex. Is this a political awareness or alerting people that are you telling the members that if you don't provide us with this post, then you won't pass the national anthem law? Now, are you using this as a political to apply political pressure on members? Now, how complex is this? Now, I don't understand why you cite these two examples to show that your workload is heavy and complex. Now, how complex is the national anthem law? How many colleagues of directorate grade or senior law draftsmen, how many hours did they spend on the national anthem law? If you did, it must be low efficiency.
In terms of the national anthem law, it is something that goes into the sensitive category when it comes to drafting. And so for that reason, there was a directorate level colleague as the principal drafter and a senior government counsel as the co-drafter. and drafts were reviewed at deputy level and also reviewed by the law draftsman. However, there is certainly not any political intention in including that bill. It shows, though, that there are some bills that take time, that are not mega projects in terms of the volume. Sometimes it can be a relatively short bill that is sensitive and complex and falls into a category where somebody who is very experienced is required to be fully involved.
朱凱廸議員係4分鐘。
朱凱廸, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions. First, following up on my earlier question on amending immigration ordinance. Now, just now, Ms. Cheung's answer makes me feel as if the DOJ wants to switch to a position that I'm only the legal advisor of the Security Bureau. When they have an amendment piece of legislation, I just ensure that it's not infringing the basic law and so on. But my question is, this amendment will bring a certain outcome, that is the judicial review on non-refoulement claims would decrease sharply, and I don't think it is an unintended consequence, but it's rather an intended consequence. And the Chief Justice, Mr. Ma, seems to be passing that message. And the DOJ, in the amendment, do you have some stance of your own, and that you are not just serving as advisor, legal advisor to Security Bureau? Are you saying that what the Chief Justice said has nothing to do with us? We're really only considering the Security Bureau's consideration. Now, it's not that we don't want you to create such a post. Now, the number of new cases every year, now it hasn't changed over the years. 6,000 in 2018 and 6,000 in 1998. But the accumulated increase has now increased sharply to 38,000. So you can't say that there is a more and more sharper and sharper increase, because there is no such trend, because the number of cases, new cases every year has been steady. So why is there such a multifold increase? And it seems that by having one more post, it wouldn't resolve such a structural problem. So can you tell us where the problem lies? And apart from adding a post, what other ways are you employing to reduce the accumulated backlog? Now, I like to stress that although the new cases every year appears to be steady, that is 5,000 to 6,000 cases, yet it's a large number, and every year at the directorate grade, we haven't increased the manpower at that level, and yet we have to deal with so many cases. Now, why is there? How does this compare in addition to the large number of accumulated cases? The accumulation, especially for litigation cases, it takes time at the court to, and then when the trial is completed, there may be appeal. So procedurally, it takes time to complete the entire legal procedure. Fernando Cheung, to follow the same logic, Now, I don't know whether Ms. Cheung means that the accumulated figure is a technical figure, whereas most of the procedures have been completed, yet because certain procedures take time, yet the number keeps increasing. Because the number of new cases every year has been extremely steady. You can see from the information provided over the past 20 years. It's 5,900 or 6,000 every year. And it's the same for 20 years. Yet the accumulated cases keep increasing. Now, I said that this is largely technical. Most of the work has been completed. So it may not directly have to do with manpower requirements. Or is it that the increase from 9,000 to 36,000 does indeed require additional manpower? If my question is correct, why is it that only after 20 years do you come to us for additional manpower? Ms. Chow? Now, whether it's just a technical need? No, it isn't. Now, if these cases are not concluded, we always need manpower to deal with it, because litigation takes time to complete, and in the process, at different stages, we need colleagues to follow up, and there needs to be a supervisory staff to follow up, especially for important cases. And we can't just look at numbers to reflect the pressure of our work and on the need for a supervisory ranking officer. The number of cases is one thing, but I think you would all agree that cases involved in recent years deal with more complex and more legal perspectives. So we need persons with suitable experience and knowledge, especially knowledge about civil law. Why is it that only now we create such a post? I like to stress that for 30 years we haven't changed our establishment. In the past, when dealing with mitigation 10 years ago, we agreed that we would have a PGC post, but not D3, it was D2. And on immigration cases at the time, the court meted out judgment, so we know that the workload would increase. So we created some posts of lower than PGC rank, and then we looked at long-term needs, and now we have looked into our current work situation, and we feel that to manage the cases efficiently now, it would be a suitable time to make such a proposal. Can you be more simple? Now, why is it that it takes 20 years? In fact, you said 30. Ms. Chow, it's because we are very cautious. We see that today's workload and complexity is not sustainable on the current manpower. Next, Claudia Mo, 4 minutes. I have a question, especially for Ms. Johnson. 我想問莊女士嘅，我係覺得好奇，之前呢，你話國歌法呢草案呢，唔係複雜又唔係長，但係好敏感喎。咁你重複咗2次敏感呢個字，點樣敏感呢？咁你覺得佢敏感？ 咁所以呢，就喺文件裏頭提到佢，正如涂謹申議員所提出嘅，即係好似要提醒我哋嗰啲支持北京嘅議員話一定要通過啦，係咪一個政治上提醒嘅作用呢？莊女士，我諗呢，考慮到國歌法呢係已經引入係而且呢係2月19號已經第一次開會呢，咁我覺得係唔係好適宜，亦都唔想呢係再講呢個草案。但係點樣敏感呢？你頭先係咁樣形容，你講咗2次喎。莊女士，你想回答嗎？我只會講就敏感方面嚟講呢。呢個好多時就係要睇嗰個問題係是否平鋪直述。咁你頭先話呢個國歌法唔係話特別。
Was raising his question, and it's not particularly long a bill either. So what's?
But I mean, it is sensitive in terms of the public sentiment, and I think.
Let me rephrase my question then. You said it's terribly sensitive. Well, you didn't use the word terribly. It's my addition. Okay, the bill is sensitive. Sensitive in the sense that whether or not, say, a certain provision should be included or excluded, it's up to the boss up there, and you would need very long and probably numerous meetings to make a final decision on that. Is that one of the...
No, the primary consideration is, will this be something that will engender a lot of public debate?
Well, it certainly did. It has done so far. But we're talking about the content, right? Not its consequentiality. The content is neither complex nor lengthy or complicated as such. But then you call it sensitive, and that's why it's included in this document to sort of entice this particular committee to pass the request for extra funding for this extra post. I'm asking you, if you can, to elaborate on that.
Ms. Johnson.
In terms of what is sensitive, it is really about making a judgment call about whether something is a proposal that will engender much public debate. And for that reason, I would categorise the National Anthem Bill as being sensitive legislation.
OK，涂謹申議員4分鐘。
主席，其實我
James Toll, 4 minutes. Now I'm beginning to understand. At first I didn't understand. Why is it that you initially said for sensitive issues you need more manpower? Now, is it this way? Let me ask. For instance, national anthem law. Now you are adding a directorate post. You are not adding a more junior post, because this doesn't depend on numbers of staff. You need someone senior. Now, is this what you are referring to in paragraph 24? To put it simply, if there is major legislative work, there must be a deputy law draftsman to undertake the critical role and to oversee the provision of drafting services and for further amendment. Now, this national anthem bill has been completed, and what else is major? And then there is Article 23. Now, this is not national anthem law you're talking about. You're talking about Article 23. This is requires a high-level thinking and rethinking. Now, since 2003, now this is a major issue. Now, we have suffered it, the workload for so long, and now you cannot take it anymore. You are going to undertake Article 23. You can't let a junior staff do it. So you need a senior deputy principal government counsel to do it. Is it like that? You want such a post in order to tackle Article 23. So to lead and to review at different stages, at such a stage being for the central government to peruse it. Is it because of Article 23?
I assure the member that this position, we are seeking to create this position not for any particular item of legislation, but to cope with the overall workload of the Law Drafting Division.
阿蕭生，你有補充啊？
主席喺度，我都可以請議員咧睇翻我哋文件嘅第27段。
Mr. Xiu, we can refer to paragraph 27. We make it clear that in the coming 2 years, we expect that the major pieces of work would be the trade single window and the business to government trade documents to the electronic platform, therefore. Now, well, you just that's just for show. Now, actually, you have passed the national anthem law. You have passed the co-location of cross-border facilities, and now what is coming is Article 23. You talk about trade and so on, but actually, you must have been working on it already. Now you have such a senior position being added. What else is there but Article 23? Outlaw him. The document says if there is major legislative work, there must be a deputy law draftsman, and there must be revision of the legislation, so the quality of the work is very important. Now, that's what the document is in fact saying. So isn't that the role of this deputy law draftsman? I think she has explained very clearly the new post is for the overall workload. There have been several rounds of questions. Now,
workload, we're talking about for civil cases, cases were outsourced to external lawyers and numbers dropping, and then yet they are hiring external lawyers because of controversial legal viewpoints. There's no way I can really argue with you. And then I asked her about the new arrangement, say arrangement for various bills. And every time, it's like different units are involved. When I ask her about whether the amendment to district court rules, and that is the work of the civil litigation unit, and however, the drafting of national anthem law comes under the law drafting unit. For the creation of a permanent post under the law drafting division, well, they're not supernumerary. If you are only mainly to work on the national anthem law, then you only need actually a temporary post, even for the single trade window or the other documents related And why can't you have a supernumerary post as opposed to a permanent post, Mr. Siu? As I explained just then, in creating a directorate level staff, we need to carefully consider why. Since the 1980s, for the directorate level chief government counsel lawyer, we actually haven't created any new ones. We relied on creation of non-directorate level staff and redistribution of manpower internally to handle the work. Now that the complexity and volume of work have increased, and we now see the need to create the new posts, and we need to have the posts continuously. Claudia Mo, 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to apologize. I have a little confession here. I thought that for the law drafting division to have a permanent post of PGC is something ordinary, because you do need draftsmen for legislation, of course. But what came to mind is that the Hong Kong government is now amending the heading of the law on torture of animals, and then people applauded it. They thought that this is about the Animal Welfare Act with the renaming. So this is something that needs to be done. But the more I heard now, I'm getting a bit scared, because for animal legislation, you wouldn't call it an important legislative work, right? So would you just make a promise here, just in one sentence, that now the request for the new PGC permanent post in the law drafting division is 101% unrelated to the plan to draft the Article 23 legislation? Can you make a promise and then repeat what I just said? Mr. Siu, in the paper, we clearly mentioned that the creation of the two posts are intended to deal with the expected workload in the days ahead. Well, you had already mentioned what's in the paper. I can see it myself. You don't need to repeat that. But can you here make a pledge here saying that the two new permanent posts in the law drafting division and the other division actually are totally unrelated to the future legislation on Article 23? Chairman, I think what I can say is that the work of the law drafting division is to support the policy needs of various bureaus. If relevant policy bureaus have the need, then we provide the support needed. Well, in that case, I can totally get your point. That is, you cannot promise here, even though, the reasons are given, so-called reasons are given in the paper, yet you cannot deny that your expected incoming workload will include, probably include the legislation on Article 23, because you would not rule that out, right? The policy bureau, someone from the policy bureau will give you an order. Once you receive the order, then the law drafting division will need to begin the work. I was just trying to actually ask what James To had been asking you, Mr. Siu. I can say at this stage, envisage the amount of work in the coming days, as mentioned in the paper. Senator Zhang, in the enclosure on the proposed responsibilities and duties of the deputy law draftsman, point 2 is that it will include the drafting of Chinese and English version of the main body of the legislation, that is complex or sensitive parts of the paper, of the legislation. And in paragraph 27 of the paper, it says that the work will be related to the establishment of the trade single window and also the statutory corporate rescue procedure for companies in short-term financial difficulty. I don't think those work is sensitive, but from what I heard, it seems like national anthem law will be the most sensitive. But as pointed out by James To, the national law bill has been drafted. The bill has been tabled in LegCo, so there's no more drafting work needed. And you're not going to make any change to it, right? So what's the need for drafting again? So in the days ahead, when you are to create such high-level job, whose duty is to draft text of the most complex and sensitive legislation, what sort of sensitive legislation you are anticipating? Mr. Siu or Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Member. If I could refer you to paragraph 28 of the paper, at which we give the details of the increasing complexity of legislation. When we were preparing this paper, it was necessary for us to provide some examples, and we provided the examples that have been mentioned this afternoon. However, there is just an ongoing trend to the volume of legislation and the complexity of legislation increasing, and the workload that's currently shouldered by the two existing Deputy Law Draftsmen is no longer sustainable. This Deputy Law Draftsman will not only be involved in personally drafting, but in supervising the work of four drafting teams involved in many other aspects of the
I'm sorry, Ms.
the
Johnson.
division.
Mr. Chair, my question was, what will be the sensitive laws that you are trying to draft in the future? And I did not notice any particular bills that are mentioned in paragraph 28 being sensitive.
It's very much a matter of whatever legislative proposals are on the government's legislative program from time to time.
So there isn't any plan in drafting any sensitive law in the future?
Well, actually, I have to say that in drafting the corporate rescue procedure legislation, there are some very sensitive issues. So it's not as if just because those projects are mega projects that there are no sensitive issues.
涂謹申議員3分鐘。
主席，
James To, 3 minutes. First of all, I feel that the administration, well, we're asking you about complex and sensitive legislation to be worked on. Single trade window or corporate rescue procedure. Well, you have your deputies who are senior as well, they can handle those. And now you're saying you are talking about sensitive and complex legislation. So I was scratching my head. Just then your colleague said that single trade window and then corporate rescue procedure, they can give the details. And when Claudia Mo asked it in the other way, can you rule out the work on legislating on Article 23, at least saying that, well, you won't legislate in 2 years, and you didn't give an answer. And then what's also problematic is that usually it's up to what the Policy Bureau wants. So if the Policy Bureau wants the legislation, then you have to do it. That means you are creating spare capacity for legislating on Article 23. So I'll ask it this way. The Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, said that Article 23, the preparatory work for that is always ongoing. When she was pressed for an answer by the pro-establishment camp, she's answered that when the right time came, when the society or the social environment is right, they'll begin it. But then they said, but she's also said the preparatory work is always ongoing. So the drafting or the law drafting division is it involved in the preparatory work for the drafting of Article 23? Can you tell us whether you'll be involved in the preparatory work, Mr. Siu? The law drafting division, of course, whenever it receives the instructions from the Policy Bureau, it will then, only then will it begin the drafting. So how about the preparatory work concerned? Based on past experience, they may want to have a blue bill or white bill. Is it that they may ask you to draft some texts first for them to consider or show to Beijing? That kind of preparatory work? Is that a kind of work that the Policy Bureau can ask the Law Drafting Division to do? Mr. Steele. Ms. Johnson?
主席，
Well, Chairman, I already explained with the Bureau. Well, we are working together as part of the government. I can only repeat what I said. I'm asking you for a model. Let me ask you this way. That is, let's not mention about Article 23 for preparatory work of legislation. Can the Policy Bureau give you order to draft certain provisions or texts first to show to some trading partner or Beijing? Is that part of the work of the Law Drafting Division? Mr. To, I think time some of you need to wait for another round. Ray Chan, Holden Chan, or Loh Hin are in the queue. I think many more members want to ask, but we need to adjourn the meeting at 7. So now is Chen Chi-chun's turn, 5 minutes. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on the point raised by Loh Hin, an agreement that we read about in a press release. That is Mainland and Hong Kong SAR mutual recognition of judgments. And the government said that this is under the Policy Bureau. So this is this kind of agreement, was it drafted by Beijing or drafted by the Law Drafting Division? And then was Hong Kong only asked to sign the agreement in Beijing? Early on, we never pay attention to any sort of agreement of mutual recognition. And the press release also said that they will arrange for the implementation of the arrangement in Hong Kong. And once the procedures completed, the agreement will take effect. So is it the Law Drafting Division work to amend relevant legislation to facilitate the implementation of the arrangement of mutual recognition? As for the arrangement, well, the Law Drafting Division will do the work. For the relevant work related, we have already briefed the panel on administration of justice and legal services. As for the implementation of the mutual recognition agreement, there's a need for local legislation, and the Law Drafting Division will help with the drafting of local legislation. And the mutual recognition agreement itself was not the responsibility of Hong Kong. Well, yes, it's up to the Policy Bureau to formulate and to discuss the arrangement or the content of the arrangement. But when it comes to, well, this is an agreement between Hong Kong and China, but the drafting of the agreement, did it require the vetting by the Law Drafting Division, or was it just decided upon by Beijing? Ms. Johnson?
In relation to international agreements or agreements between Hong Kong and the mainland, the Law Drafting Division is not involved.
So in other words, did Hong Kong have to write any part of the agreement? Do you need to ask the Policy Bureau for an answer? I think both parties, we're talking about arrangements arrived at after discussions between both parties, Hong Kong and the mainland. So can the government supplement again on complex and sensitive legislation? You cited some examples, but members are still concerned. Now that we're talking about the creation of new posts, and yet if a few days later there's a controversial legislation or legislative bill that is tabled, and we would be concerned. And the examples you cited, besides them, can you tell us any piece of a bill that you would need to draft in the remaining legislative term? Bills, complex bills that would need the input of the newly created post? Please go ahead. I think, member, as we mentioned, the single trade window we mentioned in the annex mentioned in the paragraph 28. Sometimes it involves amending 40 pieces of legislation in relation to any amendment to ordinance. So you can imagine the complexity of our work. Yes, our Trade and Commerce panel discussed relevant bills, but I'm talking about the creation of this particular post. Is it related to any plan to draft bills? Is that related to the creation of the new post? I think we've explained in paragraph 27 the main piece of work facing the or that actually creates the need for the new post. Well, other members have tried to ask you the same thing. Well, could you tell us that maybe the next day there could be important legislative drafting work needed, and that would justify that's the reason behind the creation of the new post? Can I say that? Can I look at it that way? Ms. Johnson?
If we look at what is listed on the legislative program, on the government's publicly available legislative program, we see the volume of legislation and the complexity of the legislation that's currently being worked on within the Law Drafting Division. There are then, of course, obviously just ongoing projects, including the two that are mentioned, the Statutory Corporate Rescue Procedure Bill and also the Single Trade Window Bill. But I mean, these are just examples of the mega projects, and then there is very much more legislation in the normal course of the government's legislative program.
好嗱，而家時間到啦嚇，咁我哋下禮拜再。
Well, time's up. We need to carry on our discussion next week. But let me remind you, please don't politicize issues. This is about creation of a post. Only after all. Let's continue our discussion next week.